I've always been drawn to abandoned places. Their silent grandeur and the secrets hidden beneath layers of dust and rust captivated me like a magnet. As an airsoft player and an explorer, I couldn't resist the temptation to play a few games in long-deserted locations. This time, our team chose an old military base. Once it housed several barracks, a football field, showers, training grounds, and combat positions. But the crown jewel was a massive bunker descending 4 levels into the earth. We learned about it from friends who also have a passion for exploring such places. Inspired by their stories, we decided to venture out and investigate. Playing on the surface quickly became monotonous, and our attention was drawn to something more mysterious: the bunker. Even before we reached the site, it was clear that there would be no easy way inside. When the military left in the 1980s, they sealed all the entrances securely. The only way to get inside the bunker was to descend through a ventilation shaft. 3 of us, myself, Alex, and Peter, decided to take the risk and go down into the bunker. Climbing down rusty metal grates and breathing the stale air of old pipes was not for the faint-hearted, but our excitement drove us forward. Eventually, we reached the first level. It was a long, ominous corridor. Doors lined both sides, each one hiding unknown secrets. The walls breathed with dampness and decay, and the echo of our footsteps reverberated off the bare concrete. Our headlamps picked out rusty pipes and bundles of frayed cables from the darkness. At the end of the corridor, there was a staircase leading down. We realized that playing here was impossible. The space was too narrow and dark. We needed to go lower. On the second level, we found ourselves in a vast storage area. It was filled with rows of metal shelves interspersed with wooden crates and empty containers. Alex mentioned that this place was perfect for an airsoft game. However, we continued to explore further. The far end of this immense warehouse had a side extension, and what awaited us around the corner made my heart skip a beat. As we rounded the shelves, I noticed a room in the distance. To my surprise, a dim light was on inside. This was strange. We knew for sure that the site had been abandoned for over 30 years, but that wasn't all. We moved closer and I peered into the open door. In the middle of the room stood a table, and behind it sat a person in a black cloak. His face was hidden. He sat hunched over the table with a hood covering his head. I thought it might be another explorer or stalker like us, taking a break. But when I called out to him, something incredible happened. The light in the room went out instantly, and the air seemed to freeze. A sharp, foul odor hit my nose. "Run!" I shouted. My friends didn't ask what happened, and we bolted back. We sprinted towards the ventilation shaft, feeling the dark walls closing in around us. We heard the rapid sound of heavy footsteps as if someone was approaching. Glancing back, I saw a shadow following us. In a panic, I fired several shots towards the footsteps, hoping to scare off the pursuer. My bullets thudded dully against the walls to no effect. Emerging onto the surface, I turned around and saw Alex and Peter also climbing out of the shaft, breathing heavily and wide-eyed. We exchanged looks full of confusion and horror. Since we left that place, my desire to go underground has left me. Bunkers or just basements, it doesn't matter. What we saw is beyond explanation. Maybe it was just our fear playing tricks on us in the darkness and silence, or maybe we stumbled upon something better left undisturbed. We sat in silence for a long time on the ground near the shaft, exchanging looks of bewilderment and horror. I knew my friends were thinking the same thing as I was. We couldn't make sense of what we had seen. Alex was the first to break the silence. "That was unbelievable," he said, still trying to grasp what had happened. Peter nodded in agreement, and we all looked at each other. We all felt the same mixed emotions of fear and bewilderment. No one wanted to speak about it, but we all knew we had encountered something supernatural. After some time, we stood up and began to slowly move away from this sinister place. Each step was cautious, as if we feared awakening something slumbering. When we had moved far enough away, I glanced back at the bunker. It stood there, majestic and terrifying, hiding its dark secrets. I realized I would never forget that day. We had tried to challenge the unknown, and it had responded. Since then, every time I see something abandoned, I think of that bunker. It has become a symbol to me of how far curiosity can take you. Now, whenever I hear stories about abandoned places, I feel a mix of emotions. On one hand, I'm still drawn to them, but on the other, I know some things are better left unexplored. My friends share this sentiment. We no longer discuss that day, but each of us knows we saw something that forever changed our view of such places. Time heals, but it cannot erase the memory of what we experienced. This story stayed with us forever. We were ordinary people looking for adventure but found something more. And now we know that the secrets hidden in abandoned places can be far more sinister than we could ever imagine.
My name is Charlotte, and today I will tell you about my encounter with the invisible side, which happened when I was just a little girl. Our village has a peculiar feature. The cemetery is right at its center. Numerous roads, like blood vessels, encircle this grim heart, and almost all routes pass either through or along the cemetery. My family was particularly lucky. Our house stood directly next to the cemetery. Every time we stepped outside, we saw crosses and tombstones, and funeral processions passed by our gates as if death was our constant neighbor. When I was 6 years old, one night I woke up and found that my parents were not at home. Later, I learned that they had gone to the city for the market. To save money on the road, they walked, as many in our village did. The walk to the city took about 1.5 to 2 hours, and to arrive by 6 in the morning, they left at 4. They didn't wake me, hoping I would wake up with the daylight. But I woke up right after they left. The house was plunged into darkness, and no one responded to my calls. Wild fear gripped me. I jumped out of bed barefoot and ran to my grandmother's house, 7 homes away from us. Running to my grandmother's house in the middle of the night, I started knocking on her window. Sleepy, she opened it, sighed, and calmed me down, explaining that my parents had gone to the city. I remembered that I had run out of the house in fear without closing the door. Being a responsible child, I asked my grandmother to go with me to close it. She grumbled but still took me home. We went inside together. I put on shoes and a sweater, and my grandmother made the bed. I had calmed down completely. After closing the door, we went back to my grandmother's to have tea. As soon as we stepped onto the road leading past our house to the cemetery, we heard the sound of hooves from the cemetery, as if someone was quickly riding a horse. Instinctively, we stepped aside, looked around. No one was there. The clatter was approaching. Even if we had seen a horse, it would have been strange. Firstly, it was running from the cemetery at night, and secondly, in 1993, no one in our village rode horses anymore. We stopped on the roadside, looking towards the source of the sound. My grandmother moved me behind her, holding me with her hand, and I had no desire to peek out. Fear paralyzed my muscles, even my throat. I couldn't breathe. My grandmother began shouting curses, demanding that the evil spirit leave us alone. The clatter didn't stop immediately, but faded, halting, by my estimation, only 5 to 7 steps away from us. Without speaking, we quickly headed home. That night became the greatest fear of my childhood. It was then that I realized there is another, invisible side to the world around us, unseen in the daylight but always present, waiting for its moment.
One night, in a small American town, a girl named Amy threw a party and invited all her school friends. There were many boys and girls, and at the end of the party, already late at night, they started telling each other scary stories. One boy named Ben shared an urban legend about an old cemetery located near Amy's house. According to the legend, an old woman, rumored to be a witch, was buried in the middle of the cemetery. It was said that if you stood on her grave at midnight, she would drag you to hell.
I never go near the cemetery after dark, said another boy, Johnny. You're all a bunch of fools, Amy laughed. That's just a silly superstition. I can't believe you're taking it seriously. Ben smirked. It's easy to be brave sitting safely at home. It's a different story when you're actually at the cemetery. Nothing would change, Amy replied immediately. Fine, then prove it, Ben said. We'll all go to the cemetery and wait outside, and you'll go in and stand on the witch's grave. The grave doesn't scare me, Amy said. I'll do it right now. You'll have to prove you really did it, Ben said. He took a knife from the kitchen table and handed it to her. Stick this knife in the grave, he said. Then we'll know for sure you were there. The teenagers headed to the cemetery. When they reached the iron gates, they stood in a semicircle, all eyes on Amy. She tried to pretend she wasn't scared, hoping they wouldn't see her trembling. With the knife tightly gripped in her hand, Amy passed through the old iron gates and entered the darkness of the cemetery. In the moonlight, the gravestones and trees cast strange and unsettling shadows. Finally, she found the old woman's grave. There's nothing to be afraid of, Amy repeated to herself. It's just a stupid story. Kneeling before the headstone, she whispered, I'm not afraid of you. Then she raised the knife above her head and drove it into the ground. Take that, old witch, she giggled. Amy was about to turn and leave when she felt someone grab her from behind. She couldn't move. Something was holding her skirt and pulling her back. Terror filled her. Help! She screamed. She's got me! She's got me! When she didn't return, her friends grew worried. After a while, they headed into the cemetery to find her. They found her lying on the witch's grave, her face frozen in a scream of terror. Amy hadn't noticed that she'd driven the knife through the hem of her skirt, pinning herself to the grave. That was what had held her. The poor girl was so frightened that her heart gave out and she died of fear.